Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rohan. I'm a third year medical student studying at Cambridge University. Today we'll be continuing our series about the EPQ. In this video we'll cover the process of actually writing your project and the production log. Just a reminder, I put my project in the Google Drive folder in the description box below for you to have a look at, just to see what a finished project looks like. Remember, it should only be used as a guide and it's copyrighted material, so please don't plagiarize. Anyway, let's start with some tips about writing the essay. The biggest thing when it comes to writing your project is just getting started. Hopefully by this stage you've done most of your research and you have a plan outlining the general structure of your project. 5,000 words sounds daunting, and this sometimes stops people from actually getting started. I found it helpful just to break down the project into well-defined sections and treating them like smaller essays. So for example, in my project, I had sections like the discovery of angiogenesis, the use of anti-angiogenics in the treatment of different eye pathologies, as well as its limitations. The main weakness of doing this approach by breaking down your project into discrete areas is that sometimes it can be easy to fall into the trap of just describing processes or outlining facts, rather than analysing them critically. The main thing to make sure that this doesn't happen is just to keep linking back to the title of your EPQ, and by forming direct comparisons between each of the sections. It's also helpful to order your points in a logical way to give your project a nice flow and keep the reader on board. This will hopefully stop you drifting into irrelevant material and will help you get those AO3 marks pertaining to coherent structure and closely addressing the nature of the task. Just be aware that this type of approach may not be feasible if you're doing something like a humanities project or anything which requires development of a continuous narrative to explain your argument. In the conclusion, make sure that you actually answer the question in the title. Don't be afraid to bring in your own judgments and say why you think a certain argument is stronger than the other side. You could also mention where future research could be done and where the limitations of your project is. For example, was there anything that would be relevant to the title that you weren't able to include in this project? Regarding the practicalities of writing the project, I found it helpful to try do a first draft in as few sittings as possible. This is because it just takes quite a bit of effort to get your research and plan documents up and get into that flow state where you're able to easily retrieve all the information in your mind when you need it. Therefore, it's sometimes easier to work on it really intensely for a few days rather than dragging it on for weeks. For the first draft, don't worry too much about waffling on or the word limit. Just get everything down which you think is relevant to the question. Then you can email your supervisor and they can tell you which bits you can cut out and which bits to improve. Be sure to explain everything in more detail than you think is required. This is important because sometimes when we're immersed in a particular topic, we forget that the reader won't be familiar with many of the concepts we are. This also helps you eat up more of the word count in case you're struggling to fill it. Oh, and just on that note, you want to aim to be within 5 to 10% of the word limit. Anything shorter than that, then it doesn't really leave a good impression. Some things to consider about the writing style is try avoid long convoluted sentences. In general, shorter sentences are clearer to understand, and the same goes for paragraphs. Be sure to proofread each draft. You can use software such as Grammarly, which may detect more subtle errors in grammar even with its free version. Also, try avoid repetition of the same word. For example, instead of using the word furthermore, try in addition or moreover, or even just consider omitting the word. Using a thesaurus may be helpful for this. Finally, try make your finished product look good. So, for example, some simple formatting tips such as justifying the text so each line is like the same length. And apparently, there's some anecdotal evidence that using the font Georgia instead of the default Calibri one on Word can increase your mark. Consider also increasing your line spacing a bit, as this would make it easier for the reader, and it may be helpful if your supervisor wants to print out your EPQ to annotate it. Make sure to include lots of diagrams and subtitles just to break up the text, as this will keep the reader engaged. With diagrams, make sure that you reference where you got them from, and each one should have a legend. You should also refer to this legend in the text by saying something like, as shown in figure 1. Don't just have random diagrams for the sake of it. You can also do things like starting each new section of the project on a new page. You could be fancy by adding page numbers and then do a contents page at the front. I didn't bother with all that, but that's something you could do. Be sure to include a reference list or a bibliography at the end. And in general, the best way to learn about these formatting skills is just to read some actual journal articles and to see what they've done. Okay, so that was writing the project. Now let's talk about the production log. The production log is an integral part of the EPQ. Sometimes you hear that the EP is a process-based qualification, which means that the process that you undergo in actually creating your final product or your final essay is equally as important as the final product itself. These are what each page of the production log is for, and I'll link this resource in the description box below. You notice that you don't have to fill in every page. Some are filled in by your supervisor or your center coordinator. My main tip is just to fill out the production log immediately after each meeting with your project supervisor. It'd also really help if you made notes during your meetings. So basically, take it seriously, but honestly, it's really easy to get right. This is because the actual document, which you can download from the AQA website, includes prompts which you need to talk about. So all you have to do is answer each sub-question in a decent level of detail and you'll be fine. Note that some schools and colleges also use a platform called Project Q, and this is basically just an online version of the production log. The main things that they want to see in the production log are: number 1, evidence of title progression. This will help you secure AO3 marks, and just a note on this, you should have a working title by the end of the candidate proposal stage, and you should have the final title sealed by the mid-project review stage. Number 2 is the ability to plan out the project then execute on that plan, or change the plan where appropriate. This will help you get AO1 marks, but also AO2 marks in some places where you need to talk about what resources you plan to use. Things to plan include setting deadlines, for example, when you're going to get your first draft done by, but also talk about your intended structure of the project. And number 3, they want to see evidence of reflection and evaluation of how the project is going or how the project went. The summary and reflection page is particularly good for this, and this will help you secure AO4 marks. Now, I don't think there's much point of me reading out examples from my production log because it's linked down below for your perusal. The only thing I'd say is don't be afraid to be a bit personal in the production log. By this I mean talk about your individual circumstances. For example, I often talked about how I had to fit EP work around preparing for university admissions tests or interviews. I also frequently mentioned the challenges I was facing, such as the sources being quite hard to understand and maintaining analysis and making it accessible to a lay reader. It's these types of things what they mean when they talk about the process of the EPQ. Plus, an added bonus is it gives you some material to talk about in your presentation when you're evaluating on how the project went. So that's all for this video. If you found it useful, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. You might also want to check out my other videos in the EPQ series. I'm sure you'll find them helpful. Anyway, take care and bye for now.